Only a few people knew that he was a disciple of West Hill and that his sword formula came from Haotian Taoism. That's not the point. I'm not interested in denouncing the empire on behalf of the West Hill martial uncles. What I'm interested in is that the sword master tore the murderer's clothes before he died, but the murderer didn't bleed. Upon hearing this, monk Huang Yang seemed to be lost in thought and slowly replied, "An expert at the peak of martial arts?" Li Qingshan turned his head and tucked his sleeves behind him. He looked at the monk quietly and said, "It's impossible for the martial arts masters of the empire to make a move. The martial arts masters of the South Jin Kingdom, the Great River Kingdom, and the Yen Kingdom are all under the surveillance of the imperial court. Therefore, the possibility of this happening is very small. Therefore, I suspect that the ascetic monks of the Yueluan Kingdom have snuck in and gone crazy. That's why you came to ask me." Monk Huang Yang smiled and repeated what he had said before. "It's said in the world that you have been to the unknown place in the wilderness. I know it's not a legend, but a true story. In that case, I certainly have to ask you about the ascetic monks of the Yueluan Kingdom. I'm from the Pingzhou prefecture of the Tang Empire." Monk Huang Yang stopped smiling and replied quietly, "And I don't believe that the monks of the Yueluan Kingdom would take the risk of sneaking into Chang'an City to kill people for no reason. Then how do you explain the bloodless clothes on the murderer's clothes?" Li Qingshan looked into his eyes and asked. Monk Huang Yang's eyes were peaceful and he replied slowly, "The vermilion bird wakes up due to anger and condenses the breath of heaven and earth into the nameless fire. The fire is powerful enough to burn everything, let alone some sticky blood stains. Maybe the murderer has already been burned to ashes." This younger brother of the emperor of the Tang Empire, a monk who had advanced in Dharma, was really amazing. He had actually guessed the truth of the matter so easily. However, this couldn't completely explain all the problems. Li Qingshan frowned and asked, "Even if you and I do our best, we can probably only make the painting lazily open its eyes to take a look. How many people in the world can believe that the vermilion bird wakes up and gets angry? If he really is one of those legendary predecessors, why did he come to Chang'an City to kill people? Why did he take the risk of provoking the vermilion bird's anger? Why didn't he show any signs?" Monk Huang Yang smiled and said, "Again, the divine objects left by the previous sages have their own meanings in their movements. How can we ordinary people understand them? If the predecessor who may have come to Chang'an City has really surpassed the knowing destiny state and has the ability of Tianqi or the limitless thought, then his purpose is not something we can guess." Chapter 116. People looked up at the high sky and praised Haotian's kindness. No matter how diligent they were in cultivation, no matter how perceptive they were, they never dared to dream of flying into the sky. Because they knew that no matter how difficult the road was, it was not as difficult as reaching the sky. The road from the mortal world to the sky was always full of difficulties and obstacles, and no one had ever succeeded. Haotian Divine Hall was in West Hill, and claimed to be the only sect of light that could understand the will of Haotian. But no one had ever heard of a great divine priest who could become a part of Haotian's brilliance. There was a kind of elixir in West Hill called the Heavenly Power Pill. Just from the name, one could tell how precious this kind of elixir was. It was hidden in an unknown place and was extremely rare. At this time, there were 2 heavenly power pills in the porcelain bottle in Chen Pipi's trembling hand. "They say that I'm a cultivation genius in 100 years, and I was given 3 heavenly power pills after I joined the sect. As a result, the old Taoists deep in the temple held a meeting for 3 days. You know, senior brother Yi only ate one back then. I ate one and kept one to save my life. I wanted to save the last one for senior brother in the future, but I just gave it to you. Although the heavenly power pill can't help people reach the heavenly power realm, it can increase one's lifespan by at least 10 years if it is given to an ordinary person. If it is given to a cultivator, they may be able to cross the heavenly power realm directly. If the pill is given to the monarch of the Great River Kingdom, it can definitely be exchanged for 30,000 docile virgins. It's not difficult for him to give up the throne to me. If I give this pill to Tang Ham of the Devil's Doctrine, he may be willing to betray his sect and join West Hill. Such a precious heavenly power pill is given to a poor guy like you to treat his injury? Chen Pipi wouldn't care if it was an ordinary treasure, or even if he had to use his psyche power to save the dying Ning Quebec. But the 2 pills in the bottle were too important. They were the most precious elixirs of Haotian Taoism in West Hill. If they were spread to the world, it would cause a lot of turmoil, so he was very hesitant. After a long time, the fat lad sighed bitterly and looked at the unconscious Ning Quebec. He said weakly, "Those monks always say that saving a life is more important than building a 7-story stone tower. Although I don't know what's so important about those ugly stone towers, I think it makes sense. Although I still think your life is not as important as this pill, the heavenly power pill can't speak, and you have entrusted your life to me shamelessly before you passed out, you?" The so-called reason was actually just an excuse to convince himself. Chen Pipi showed a sorrowful expression. Several green trees grew in the depths of the grassland, which made people very happy. The heavenly power pill dissipated very slowly, but was absorbed very quickly by the human body. When the last trace of medicinal power melted into Ning Kei's ocean of qi and mountain of snow, he woke up. At this time, the morning light had risen outside the old library. He leaned against the wall tiredly, squinting at the morning light coming in from the east window. His dry lips moved slightly, and he murmured so softly that it was almost inaudible, "Everything has its cause and effect. Master Haotian, you naturally have your reasons for bringing me to this world. I knew you wouldn't just watch me die. It's not Master Haotian. It's me, the genius, who can't watch you die." Chen Pipi leaned against the wall beside him and rubbed his dry eyes. He muttered, "You're all guys who have one foot in the underworld. When you wake up, you don't even know who you should thank." Ning Kei smiled tiredly and looked at his big round face quietly. He really didn't expect that Chen Pipi, who had left a message for a long time, would look like this. He asked, "How did you cure this injury?" Chen Pipi moved his fat body, rubbed his back against the wall, and stood up with difficulty. Then he put his hands on his waist and moved his sore body. He smiled contemptuously and waved his hand, saying, "How many times have I said that I'm a rare genius in the world? If you were treated by ordinary doctors, you would definitely lie in a coffin. But for me, it's just a small matter of waving my sleeves." The fat lad had always thought that he was a peerless genius in 100 years. Therefore, he had been demanding himself with the demeanor of a genius since he was a child. He envied the demeanor of his senior brothers, who were most particular about being calm. Last night, in order to cure Ning Kei, he had given him a rare and precious pill. But since he had given it, it would be a bit like showing kindness to others if he kept emphasizing it, which was seriously not in line with his aesthetic taste. Therefore, he didn't explain the details and just waved his sleeves, showing that he didn't care. Of course, if someone stood in front of him at this moment, he would definitely see that the fat on his round face was slightly twitching because of the pain and regret in his heart. In the morning light, the pained Chen Pipi turned around with a calm expression. He looked at Ning Kei's eyes and suddenly made a request, "Can I see the big black umbrella beside you?" Ning Kei was startled. After a moment of silence, he looked up at the lad and said, "I don't have the strength. You take it yourself." So it was Chen Pipi's turn to be startled. He frowned and looked at Ning Kei for a long time. After a long silence, he struggled to get down and held the handle of the big black umbrella. It was a little cold in his hand. The handle of the umbrella should be made of some common wood in the northern part of the empire. The black umbrella looked a little greasy, but nothing else could be seen. Chen Pipi looked at the big black umbrella in his hand for a long time and didn't see anything wrong. After a moment of silence, he put the umbrella back to Ning Ke and said, "Last night, I took the time to inquire about something." "What?" Ning Ke asked tiredly. "The vermilion bird woke up yesterday." Chen Pipi stared at his eyes. Ning Ke frowned slightly and thought of how he felt when he was seriously injured and unconscious on the long street. He thought of the palpitation he felt when he and Sang Sang walked through the Vermilion Bird Avenue with the big black umbrella a few months ago. But he really didn't know that the vermilion bird in the distance had been awakened at that time, so he just shook his head. Chen Pipi didn't see anything wrong. After a short pause, he continued, "Yesterday, a sword master died in Chang'an." Ning Ke was silent. Chen Pipi looked at him with a faint smile and said, "There are many sword wounds on your body. Although they have stopped bleeding, they are not old wounds because of the fire." Ning Ke smiled and looked up to ask, "What on earth do you want to say? You were seriously injured, but you didn't go home to lie down. Instead, you came to the academy in a horse carriage. It can only mean that you were injured in the morning. At that time, the Chang'an local government was searching for you. You couldn't go home, so you had to come to the academy to hide. The Chang'an local government wouldn't stop the academy's horse carriage, let alone search for you in the academy. Yesterday morning, the sword master died and the vermilion bird on the long street woke up. You were injured so many times, but there was no blood on your body. All the wounds were burned by the invisible fire. That can only mean one thing." Chen Pipi looked at him and said with a frown, "The person who killed that swordsman was you, and the person who caused the vermilion bird to be so infuriated is also you. But what I still cannot understand is that the person who did all these things is just an ordinary person. I admire you. If your surname can be Fu, then my surname can be Hua." Ning Ke leaned against the wall tiredly and said, "The problem is that since you saved me after so much trouble, I believe you won't give me to the government. So why do you ask me these questions?" Chen Pipi raised his eyebrows and said proudly, "Because I, the genius, want to prove to you that nothing can be hidden from me." Ning Ke looked at him with a smile and suddenly said, "There is no big family in West Hill that has influence all over the secular world as you said in your message. There is only one place that is afraid of the academy, and that is Haotian Divine Hall. You are not the heir of a family, but the heir chosen by Haotian Taoism." She had not slept for a day and a night, and her tanned face was slightly pale due to exhaustion, worry, and fear, as if she had been smeared with Chenjinji Cosmetic Store's powder. Yesterday morning, Ning Ke didn't come back from killing people, and the government runners were inquiring everywhere with serious expressions. Listening to the hurried hooves of the Yulin royal guards on the long street, Sang Sang knew that something was wrong. She forcibly suppressed her uneasiness and waited silently in the old brush pen shop. But when the carriage came back, Ning Ke still didn't come back, and she finally couldn't wait anymore. After asking the coachman and confirming that Ning Ke had gone to the academy in the morning, Sang Sang thought for a while and directly took out 10 taels of silver to ask the coachman to take her to the academy. Then she squatted beside the green tree on the meadow beside the carriage and waited silently. She took out 10 taels of silver and asked the driver to take her to the academy. She did not know if Ning Ke was hurt. She did not dare to ask the instructors and students in the academy. She could only wait. She squatted beside the green meadow and watched the stone gate of the academy being shrouded in darkness and awakened by the morning sun. She watched the lights in the study room being lit and extinguished. She listened to the students reading aloud. She watched the ants in front of the old shoes come and go. She watched people walking into and out of the academy, but she did not see that guy. The students of the academy came in carriages. They were curious when they saw Ning Ke's little handmaiden squatting beside the road. Some of them asked her, but she ignored them. She stubbornly kept her mouth shut and looked at the gate of the academy. After a whole night, which seemed like a lifetime, Sang Sang finally saw that figure. She rubbed her sore eyes, and her pale face gradually relaxed. She closed her eyes, cupped her hands in front of her chest, and muttered a few words. She quickly stood up with her hands on her knees. Because she had been squatting for too long, the blood and qi in her thin legs were a little blocked. Her thin body swayed, and she almost fell. Holding the big black umbrella, Ning Ke slowly walked to her. Looking at the familiar little black face and the tiredness and worry on it, he felt a surge of pity in his heart. Although they had gone through many life and death situations together in this life, it was still the happiest thing to see each other again. He naturally opened his arms and wanted to hold Sang Sang in his arms. But he suddenly found that the little handmaiden was a little taller than when she was in the city of Wei. She was already up to his chest. He was startled subconsciously and did not continue to hold her in his arms. Instead, he reached out his hand and rubbed her head with a smile. Sang Sang raised her little face and giggled. The two turned around and supported each other to walk to the carriage. They had a tacit understanding and did not say a word at the gate of the academy. The coachman yawned. Last night, he had to make do with sleeping in the carriage, and his body was extremely tired. However, with 10 taels of silver in his hands, his exhaustion was not an issue. His right hand lightly waved the horsewhip in the air, making a light cracking sound. His left hand lightly lifted the reins, and with the sound of hooves on the ground, the carriage slowly began to move. In the carriage, Ning Ke said in a hoarse voice, "I'm very tired. Let's talk about it when we get home. The padao is below. Remember to take it with you later." The carriage arrived at Lin 47th Street. Ning Ke, who was exhausted and seriously injured, seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep and did not open his eyes. Sang Sang took out the padao and stuffed it into the big black umbrella. Then she tied it to her back and, with the help of the coachman, dragged him into the old brush pen shop like a sack of grain and stuffed him into a thin quilt. In the hot summer, no matter how thin the quilt was, it was still a quilt. Ning Ke's face was flushed and he was sweating profusely. He did not know how long he had slept, but he finally woke up. He opened his eyes and confirmed that he was home. He took a deep breath and the lingering fear hidden in the depths of his heart finally spread out, making his hands and feet feel a little cold. He stared at the transparent glazed tiles on the roof. After a long silence, he suddenly said, "Recently, I have mentioned to you about the academy student named Chen Pippi. Remember that I owe this guy my life. At the right time and the right place, remind me to find a way to return it to him." At this time, Sang Sang was pouring boiling water into a bucket and preparing to wipe his body. She did not expect that he would wake up. She was startled and sat beside him, puzzled. She asked, "Return it to him? Although I don't know how he did it, my life should be saved by him. I have told you many times that there is nothing more important than our lives in this world. In this case, it is reasonable to repay him at any cost in the future." Then he looked at Sang Sang's thoughtful face and reminded her with a smile, "But you can't use our lives to repay him." "Young master, what happened?" Sang Sang stared at his still pale cheeks and asked softly and seriously. "The tea artisan is a cultivator. I was seriously injured and finally I only remember fainting on a street. As for what happened later, I am not very clear." Ning Ke thought of the wonderful encounters he had since yesterday morning, especially the vague feelings he had when he was in a coma. A trace of confusion flashed through his eyes. He frowned and repeated, "I really don't know what happened. Make something to eat. I am a little hungry." He did not like this kind of situation where there were changes happening to him without him knowing anything. After frowning and thinking, he did not want to discuss this matter anymore. Suddenly, he thought of a problem. He looked at Sang Sang with a pleading look and said, "No fried egg noodles, no fat intestine noodles, and no hot and sour noodle soup left yesterday. It must be rancid in such hot weather. For the sake of my serious injury and almost dying, let's pay for a good meal tonight. Song Song's nose turned sour when she heard his words. She thought to herself, I'm just a little maid. How could I dare to mistreat you every day? I'm just thinking that you're going to marry young mistress in the future, so I have to save some money for you. I gave the cart driver 10 taels of silver. She lowered her head and said softly, young master, when you were in a coma, I went to the antique shop next door and asked for a bowl of pickled radish. I poured it into the pot and stewed it with the duck. It will be ready soon. After saying this, Sang Sang picked up the hot towel from the bucket and wrung it. Then she put it in a place where Ning Kai could reach and walked out of the room. She wiped her slightly red hands on her apron. Sang Sang gave the cart driver 10 taels of silver. She wanted to tell the young master that although she was young and thrifty, she was not a little handmaiden who did not know what was important and what was not. When it was time to spend money, she would not be reluctant. Ning Kai lay on the bed and looked at the busy little body outside the window. He thought of the hidden annoyance in her previous words and could not help laughing. However, he did not expect that when Sang Sang saw him supporting himself on the bed, she quickly walked to the window and told him to have a good rest. Then she closed the window tightly. The light in the room suddenly became very dim. In addition to the glimmer from the glazed tiles above the head, there was only a warm candle on the table which Sang Sang had lit in advance, quietly accompanying him on the bed. Ning Kai quietly looked at the candle on the table, and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. Yen Suqing, the tea artist, was a cultivator. This hidden factor seriously destroyed his plan. If he was not lucky enough, he might have died in the small lakeside house. It was impossible for him to escape to that street, and there was no chance for him to hide in the academy for a night and meet Chun Pippi, the little wizard of West Hill. When he was in a coma on the street, he knew that something must have happened. Otherwise, he could not explain why the wounds on his body healed, nor could he explain the pain caused by the invisible spear in his chest. But he really did not know what happened at that time and what Chun Pippi had done to him. His thoughts were stagnant, his body was injured, and his spirit was damaged. He was sweating all over in the hot summer. He felt that his skin was sticky and a little annoyed. He wanted to wipe it, but his hand froze when it was about to touch the wet towel. Because he suddenly found that there seemed to be a shallow layer of obstruction between his fingers and the wet towel. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. He pulled her into his arms and held her in his naked chest, just like many years ago. He murmured, "It's good that you are alive, and I am, also very good now." He had not cried for many years since he escaped from Chang, and with a hatchet. He still did not shed tears today. But he did not know why he felt that his eyes were a little wet and his nose was a little sour. Sang Sang raised her head with difficulty and was shocked to see the faint wetness in Ning Kai's eyes. Then she guessed something and her little face was full of shock. 2 lines of tears flowed out from her willowy eyes. Being speechless and choking was definitely not enough to release the emotions of the master and handmaiden at this moment. Sang Sang opened her thin arms and hugged Ning Kai's waist tightly. She cried bitterly, "Oh, young master, this is a happy event. You have to eat more duck tonight." After the hug, they separated from each other. Ning Kai looked down at the little handmaiden's dark face with tears. His lips moved slightly as if he wanted to say something, but he did not say anything in the end. Sang Sang immediately understood what he meant. She lowered her head in shame and raised her sleeves to wipe her tears. She whispered while sobbing, I will order takeout from Building of Pines and Cranes. It will cost 6 taels of silver. That's more like it." Ning Kai lovingly rubbed her head. Sang Sang opened the box and took out the silver. She hurried to the shop and suddenly thought of something. She slowly stopped in front of the door and looked back at him. She bit her lips and said very seriously, "Young master, next time you go out and do these dangerous things, you must remember to take me with you. It's not good to wait for you in the shop." Ning Kai quietly looked at her and then nodded hard. He said, "Don't worry. This kind of thing will never happen again. At least within this year, I won't do anything again. You don't have to worry." The door of the old brush pen shop was already closed. The small wooden sign hanging on the shop originally said that the owner was busy, but Sang Sang changed it to, "The owner is happy," in the shortest time possible. Since it was a happy event, they naturally had to drink to liven things up. The master and handmaiden luxuriously ate 6 taels of silver worth of noodles from building of pines and cranes and drank 2 big pots of wine. Sang Sang, who had never been drunk before, was unexpectedly drunk today, either because she was too happy or because she felt sorry for spending so much money on a meal. Ning Kai looked at the little handmaiden who was drunk on the table and scratched his head in surprise. He thought to himself, "How could you get drunk before me?" He carried Sang Sang back to the room and covered her with a single layer of quilt. Then he sat by the bed and took a round cattail leaf fan to fan her and drive away those annoying mosquitoes. It was Sang Sang who had been serving him all these years and he rarely did these things. But after all, he had done it so many times in his childhood that he was very skilled. The great happiness and excitement gradually calmed down as the round cattail leaf fan swayed. He began to silently think about what had happened to him, and his eyes subconsciously fell on the big black umbrella beside Sang Sang's little face. This is the most wonderful plot that I have ever written. Writing a story is really hard, but I can earn a lot of money, which makes me very happy. But nothing can replace the great happiness I felt when I wrote this plot. This is probably the true meaning of this plot. Put your palms together and feel sour again. But it can't be helped. Ning Kai's nose is sour, and so am I. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 119. Ning Kai had vaguely remembered some of the wonderful things that happened yesterday morning, including the illusory but not dreamlike encounter when he was in a coma on the Long Street. The strength of a cultivator was undoubtedly revealed in the lakeside house. Even if he had brought 3 knives, he could not defeat the opponent. As for the encounter on the Long Street, it was even more dangerous. If it were not for Haotian's luck, he would not have survived, let alone have such a great lucky chance. He firmly believed that Haotian had his own purpose in letting him come to this world, so he believed that he would not die for no reason. This belief supported him through the most difficult period of his childhood and accompanied him through life and death situations. In his view, the big black umbrella beside Sang Sang's pillow was a gift from Haotian. The big black umbrella looked very ordinary, and nothing special could be seen except that it was very big. However, in the dangerous battle yesterday morning, if it had not blocked the invincible flying sword and Yen Suqing's sword fingers at the most critical moment, Ning Kai would have died long ago. The process of picking up the big black umbrella was very ordinary, just like how he picked up Sang Sang. Many years ago, Ning Kai walked on the official road with a little baby girl in his arms. It seemed that it was going to rain, and he happened to see an abandoned black umbrella by the roadside, so he picked it up. When the little boy's little hand held the thick handle of the big black umbrella, nothing strange happened in this world. The dark clouds did not pour down torrential rain, the distant Min Mountain did not shake, and there was not much black smoke rising into the sky. A certain golden-armored deity broke through the clouds and said a lot of nonsense. He did not know how to be thrifty at a young age, so he was ready to throw the black umbrella away after the rainy season because he thought it was too dirty and could not be washed in the stream. Besides, it was too heavy. It was really a bit troublesome to carry the black umbrella with the baby girl and compete with the barbarian refugees who migrated south because of the drought on the grassland for food distributed by the government. However, It was very strange that Sang Sang, who was still a thin baby girl, began to cry when she found that the umbrella was not in her arms, probably because she had slept with the big black umbrella for too long. Ning Kai could not coax her no matter how hard he tried. Even the sugar water he stole did not work. He had no choice but to pick up the big black umbrella again. Many encounters in the following years proved that Sang Sang's crying and Ning Kai's decision were extremely wise. In the process of hunting with the old hunter and later alone, the seemingly ordinary big black umbrella gradually revealed more and more strange things. The greasy surface of the big black umbrella was made of some unknown material, but it was not afraid of fire, knives, and swords at all. With this strange characteristic, the big black umbrella had saved Ning Kai and Sang Sang several times. It was because of the umbrella that the young master and handmaiden could survive in the dangerous world of the high mountains and steep ridges. Ning Kai and Sang Sang had been with the big black umbrella for many years and had long regarded it as a very important partner in their lives. That was why Sang Sang had said that day at the gate of Chang'an City, "As long as the umbrella lives, I live. If the umbrella dies, I die." In addition to being impervious to fire and knives, the big black umbrella had many other strange things. Ning Kai was very convinced of this, but he was not able to find it for the time being. He needed to explore it slowly. The battle in the morning yesterday was like the most dangerous battles in the past decade. At the last moment of life and death, he almost instinctively gave his life to the big black umbrella behind him. It turned out that the big black umbrella did not let him down. At the same time, he also discovered another secret of the big black umbrella. It could make the traceless flying sword lose all its power, and it could make a sword master unable to break through it even with his lifetime cultivation. This had gone beyond the original physical defense characteristics of the big black umbrella and entered a more wonderful state. Ning Kai even faintly felt that the big black umbrella was very likely to restrain the ability of cultivators. It could be said that the umbrella's cloth was made of some rare materials since it was impervious to swords and spears and impervious to water and fire. However, if his inference was correct, what reason could he use to explain all this? The big black umbrella lay quietly beside Sang Sang's dark face. It could neither speak nor move, just like a lifeless object. However, at this time, in Ning Kai's eyes, the tightly bound oily umbrella began to gradually release a mysterious aura. The aura was a little cold, but it disappeared in an instant when Ning Kai took a closer look. In the face of mysterious things, human beings would instinctively feel fear. However, this was, after all, a cultivation world full of the chi of heaven and earth with many magical legends. Ning Kai himself was the person involved in the most mysterious event. In addition, he had been accompanied by the big black umbrella since childhood. He used it as a shelter, a pillow, and a shield to escape. It had long become an indispensable part of his and Sang Sang's lives, so how could he have any fear? "What on earth are you?" Ning Kai, who had not yet recovered from his serious injury and encountered a surprise and happiness that made him dizzy, got up early and fell asleep while looking at the big black umbrella. Chapter 120. It was still night when he woke up from the dream. Ning Kai wiped the sweat off his forehead and sat on the bed. He looked at Sang Sang who was sleeping soundly beside him and subconsciously reached out his fingers to smooth her frowning eyebrows. Then he fell into deep thought. It was meaningless to think about this strange and frightening dream. After a moment of silence, he threw the content of the dream to the back of his mind and did not even want to recall it. He got out of bed and poured himself a cup of cold tea. Listening to the loud discussion of the neighbors in the narrow alley behind the house, he realized that it was still early and everyone was still enjoying the cool air. What the eyes see and what the heart feels is the projection of the primordial energy of all things in the world on his soul. And the purer and purer the will that this cultivator obtains through meditation, the more concentrated and powerful the primordial energy he feels will be. He was too excited during the day and completely calmed down now. Thinking of what Liu Qingchen said on the journey, he realized that he had forgotten the most important question: how much qi of heaven and earth did he feel when he entered the initial awareness state? Was it a puddle of rain, a stream, a shallow pond, or a big river or a sea? It was not the first time that he entered the initial awareness state. He did not know whether the world of qi of heaven and earth he felt was a real projection. After thinking for a moment, Ning Ke slowly closed his eyes and calmly put his hands on his knees. He re-entered the state of meditation and transmitted his thoughts to the ocean of qi and mountain of snow, and then spread them out of his body. After a while, the cautious meditation in the spiritual world transitioned to the perception in the real world. He opened his eyes and stretched out his right hand in the air, as if he wanted to catch the faint candlelight. At this time, he once again confirmed that he could clearly feel the aura in the eaves, walls, and air, and shockingly confirmed that what he felt was, "I think it's a sea, a peaceful sea." Liu Qingchen once said, "The most powerful cultivator in the world today, Liu Bai, the sage of sword from South Jin Kingdom, who was regarded as the most likely to break through the 5 states, sensed a surging yellow river at the beginning of his awakening." At that time, Ning Ke once said, "If one could sense a sea, would he be a cultivation genius more powerful than the sage of sword from South Jin Kingdom?" For more than 10 years, he ate, gambled, read, wrote, slept, rode, killed, and set fires. He kept meditating. The amount of psyche power in the young man's spiritual world was huge and extremely pure. As 10 of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of qi and mountain of snow were opened, the accumulated psyche power finally found a channel and was played into a sonorous and powerful music. Situilan lowered her head to look at the review paper for the mathematics class yesterday and didn't seem to see his movement. However, when he walked past her, she looked back and sighed at Ning Ke's back. "I've taken 2 days off, but why do I feel that everyone is looking at me differently?" Ning Ke sat down and looked at Chu Yuxian beside him. He asked with a smile, "Does everyone know that I jumped off the cliff and have an adventure, so they are jealous and hate me?" This was naturally a naughty joke, but the cheerful Chu Yuxian didn't have a smile on his face. He stared at Ning Ke's face and said seriously, "You really don't know what happened?" "I don't know." Ning Ke spread out his hands and said innocently, "The Empire is attacking the Northern Yen again? Today is the etiquette class, and the instructor is a Yen with a bad temper. That is indeed worth worrying about. Isn't it a little inappropriate to make a joke at this time?" Chu Yuxian looked at him and sighed. He said, "The whole academy, from instructors to students, is staring at the semester exam the day before yesterday. They want to see who will win the bet between you and Xie Chengyun. Who can think that the final result is that he got A+ in 5 subjects, while you didn't take the exam? This is why you think everyone is so strange." Ning Ke was slightly stunned. After being reminded, he remembered what happened that morning after Xie Chengyun and other grade A dormitory students broke into grade C dormitory, and remembered that the semester exam in the bet had ended the day before yesterday. What was he doing at that time? At that time, he was leaning against the wall on the 2nd floor of the old library, with an invisible spear in his chest and unconscious. He was accompanied by a bowl of water and 2 cold steamed buns, waiting for death. The semester exam was the day before yesterday. I really forgot. But I remember that I asked a female professor to ask for leave for me. Ning Ke explained with a smile. In his opinion, it was a very childish and funny thing to use the results of the semester exam as a yardstick for the gambling fight with Xie Chengyun. At that time, he only agreed to it because of the anger of Situilan and grade C dormitory students. Now that he missed the semester exam and the bet because of other things, it was indeed a pity to miss the opportunity to attack the pretentious arrogance of Xie Chengyun. But in any case, he would not lament, beat his chest and stamp his feet, cry on the table, and pretend to be a senior in grade 3 who forgot to get the admission ticket. In the quiet and serious morning of the semester exam in the academy, he killed a strong cultivator in the lakeside house and spent a very mysterious time on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. He went back and forth between life and death several times. He encountered the biggest crisis and the biggest luck in his 16 years of life. He did not want to stare at those classmates who thought he was a coward who avoided the fight, but he could not stop some guys who automatically won because of his withdrawal from the competition to run in front of him and insist on stare at him with verbs. And this was the origin of most conflicts in all youth idol dramas. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Seeing that Xie Qingyun didn't know how to deal with it, Zhong Dajuan couldn't help but be annoyed that his friend was too gentle, so he sneered and interjected, "In order to avoid losing face in the semester exam, you even came up with such a despicable trick as pretending to be sick to avoid the exam. In the future, if we talk about it, you can shamelessly say that it's not that you're not a match for third young Master Xie, but that you're not in good health. When people like you invite us to dinner, we really worry that there's something strange at the table, so we definitely don't dare to go." Ning Ke slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at the Tang talent from Yang Valley. He said very seriously, "I remember that the letter of challenge was taken from Xie Qingyun. So whether the semester exam is good or bad, or whether I win or lose the gambling game, it is between me and him. What does it have to do with you? If you want to have a meal, it depends on whether I can save a chair for you or not." Zhong Dajuan was not annoyed. He gently waved his fan and glanced at Xie Qingyun. Xie Qingyun did not want to be too aggressive in front of Jin Wuxia, but he could not help but feel disgusted when he saw that Ning Ke was still so eloquent and did not look ashamed. He frowned and said, "There is no need to have a meal. I just hope you can realize that your behavior really disgraces the academy's reputation. I have to pay tuition fees to study in the academy. I pay money and learn things at the same time. So I don't think I need to carry something like 1,000 years of fame. Those things have nothing to do with me." Ning Ke raised his eyebrows more steeply and said, "As for you saying that I pretended to be sick to avoid the exam, you'd better not talk about this boring inference in the future. Since we are not familiar with each other, I absolutely don't mind suing you for slander." The atmosphere in the study room gradually became tense because Ning Ke was too calm and did not have any intention of giving in. Similar to Xie Qingyun's feeling, most students looked at Ning Ke with more contempt. Chu Yuxian coughed twice and came forward to smooth things over. He said with a smile, "Knowing that you are not the opponent, but avoiding the battle to protect yourself is also a common means in the business world. You don't have to be so serious." Ning Ke glared at him and said, "Do you want to help me or pour a few buckets of dirty water on me? If you can't win the exam, just admit defeat. Why do you use such a rogue trick?" Someone in the study room suddenly said. Ning Ke did not turn his head to look at the source of the voice, but he knew that it was a student in the same room. After a moment of silence, he looked at the classmates around him who showed contempt, puzzlement and many complicated expressions, smiled uninterestedly, and then began to speak. Therefore, those students who had some doubts that Ning Ke might really be sick on the day of the semester exam were not willing to think in that direction again. Not only them, but all the young students, including the students of classroom 3, were enraged by Ning Ke's seemingly forceful reprimand, but in fact, unreasonable. Even the most ordinary student from a commoner's family was loved in the school of their hometown. How could they endure the ridicule of a group? Forget it, don't lower yourself to that guy's level. A student suppressed his unwillingness and reminded the crowd, after all, he is an old friend of the princess. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to cast a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 122. It's not appropriate to use the word old friend. Zhong Dajuan stared at the back of the figure in the rainproof corridor and said angrily, "Who knows how Her Highness met him and was deceived by him?" In front of the study room, the burly Chu Zhongtian scratched his head and said, "I mentioned to my elders that Her Highness knew Ning Ke after I returned home. My fifth uncle later wrote back that he had asked Hua Shangyue, the senior military officer of Gushan Commandery. He said that Ning Ke was a soldier of the city of Wei. His Highness had accompanied His Highness on the way back to the capital. His Highness remembered this, so he occasionally took care of him in Chang'an." Chu Zhongtian was the best among the 37 grandsons of great General Chu Xiongtu of the Tang Empire's 16 guards. He was doted on in the residence, and the elders would not avoid him when discussing the court affairs. Therefore, his words were always credible. It seems that it was just a coincidence that day in front of the old library. As for helping Her Highness on her way back to the capital, Zhong Dajuan sneered lightly and said, "What can he do as a little soldier? By the way, helping to set up tents, leading horses and collecting dung can also be counted as helping. Her Highness is virtuous and kind, so it's not strange that she occasionally takes care of him. But I really didn't expect that this villain dared to use Her Highness's prestige to raise his status. He is really despicable." Hearing this, Situilan, who had been sitting silently beside the table, suddenly stood up and looked at Zhong Dajuan. She said, "When did Ning Ke use Her Highness's prestige to raise his status? I know better than you what Ning Ke did on her way back from the city of Wei. If it was just to collect dung, do you think Her Highness would come to see him in person that day?" She raised her eyebrows and said in a low voice, "You said Ning Ke is a villain and despicable. Then I don't know what you mean by talking about others behind their backs. If you really think he is so unbearable, you can point it out to him. But as he said before he left, you dare not because you are still afraid of him." Zhong Dajuan's face darkened. He did not expect that this noble lady of Chang'an would still speak for Ning Ke when he had offended most of his classmates. He suppressed his anger and explained, "I'm not afraid of him. But we are all refined people. Do we have to roll up our sleeves and fight with that young barbarian?" Situilan did not want to talk with this so-called gifted scholar. She looked back at her companion who was whispering to Xie Chengyun, frowned slightly, and asked angrily, "Wuxia, are you coming back?" Jean Wuxia secretly glanced at Xie Chengyun's face, and then looked at Situilan with a smile, saying, "You go back first, I'll go to the old library to read for a while." If the instructors of the academy knew that one of their students had really become a peerless cultivation genius after opening 10 of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow and couldn't wait to learn the academy's unique skill, Haran sword, they would definitely praise him for being so narcissistic, and then make him stretch out his hand and slap his palm 100 times. The vermilion bird portrait carved by the sage of the previous generation on Chang'an Avenue, the mysterious big black umbrella behind him, and the heavenly power pill from a certain place in the West Hill were all the most precious and magical things in the world. But if it was only one of them, it was still not enough to make such a change in his body. There had always been a saying in the cultivation world that cultivation was just a chosen human being who was lucky to pick up the gift given by Haotian. If an ordinary person who was born unable to cultivate could cultivate, that was to go against the heaven and change his fate. The ability to go against the heaven and change his fate could only be a miracle. According to the classics or oral tradition, only the West Hill Divine Palace and the Haotian Divine Palace had this ability, and it required those great divine priests with a high state to pay a great price. Therefore, the ordinary cultivator beside Min Mountain, the talisman master in charge of the assessment of the military ministry, the old man Liu Qingchen on the journey, and Chen Pipi who left the letter could simply conclude that Ning Ke could not cultivate without any hesitation. However, when the three most magical things in the world, the vermilion bird, the black umbrella, and the heavenly power pill, had sex with Ning Ke at the same time, the world's slowly rotating fate slightly trembled. This sentence can be ignored. In that dark morning, the cultivator Yan Suqing first broke the bone and flesh defense on his chest with his lifetime cultivation, and then the top wing of the vermilion bird turned into an invisible spear and pierced through his ocean of qi and mountain of snow through this wound. Then the vermilion bird burned everything it touched with invisible fire. At this time, Ning Ke should have died. The big black umbrella played a key role at this time, protecting his last vitality like the shade of a willow that covered the sun, and reshaping the mountain of snow in his body with the inexhaustible power of the night sky. But this was not enough, because the reshaped micro-world in his body was so fragile and unstable that it could collapse at any time. At this time, Chen Pipi offered a heavenly power pill like a virgin offering her chastity. Heaven rewarded the diligent. Maybe it was because he had been too hard and tired in the past 10 years, so Haotian began to make it up to him. Ning Ke did not know that he had encountered the most magical luck in the world. Even if he knew, he could not understand the truth. He was still dissatisfied and regretful that his fate was changed against the heaven, and this kind of dissatisfaction and regret really made people angry and speechless. Chen Pipi was speechless and angry. Seeing the word, congratulations, Chen Pipi guessed that the guy had been forced to change his fate against the heaven and really embarked on the road of cultivation. He could not help but open his mouth wide and could not say a word for a long time. He strongly suspected that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He did not know about the magical battle between the vermilion bird and the big black umbrella on the long street with Ning Ke's body as the battlefield. But as a peerless cultivation genius cultivated by both the West Hill and the Academy, he could guess some reasons and consequences. But no matter how he guessed, he could not guess that Ning Ke could have such a miraculous lucky chance. The shock lasted for a long time, and he did not know what to say at all. Deep in his proud and gentle heart, a strong feeling of envy and jealousy grew. And when he saw the message on the paper, he could not suppress his anger. It was hot and dry in the summer. Although there was a cool breeze in the middle of the night, and the cicadas outside the west window gradually weakened, Chen Pipi was sweating all over, either because he was too fat or because he was angry. He untied his clothes and wrote back angrily, "First of all, I don't want to congratulate you, because this is too absurd and incomprehensible. Secondly, it's not that reading is useless, but you, a cultivation idiot, is useless. Thirdly, I admit that I am very jealous of you at this time, so I don't want to guide you. Finally, please thank Haotian and your ancestors of 18 generations. As for me, thank you my ass." Ning Ke had been brainwashed by one sentence when he was very, very young, in fact, when he was very, very young. The general meaning of that sentence was, a person's knowledge is like a circle. The more things you know, the bigger the circle is, and then you will find more and more things you don't know. He used to hate this sentence, and did not understand why his mother and teachers kept educating him with this pessimistic theory. But when he finally stepped into the world of cultivation, he found that this sentence was indeed very true, so true that it made him extremely confused and helpless, because he found that there were more and more things he did not understand. After seeing Chen Pipi's message, he very seriously read the cultivation books on the second floor according to the message, but he still could not find anything after looking at them. In this life, he was used to carrying 3 knives and killing people everywhere on the grassland, which was a relatively straightforward way of thinking, which was not a bad thing. After confirming that he could not move forward for the time being, Ning Ke decided not to think about it, but to do something more important. No one could imagine what was the first thing Ning Ke did after confirming that he could cultivate. He didn't hold a wine pot and write books all day long. He didn't go to the instructors of the academy and yell, "I can do it. I can do it. I can do it." He didn't go to the princess's mansion and tell Li Yu that he was worth investing in. Except for secretly happy in the old brush pen shop with Sang Sang, looking up from time to time like two fools, and then laughing inexplicably, he just showed off to Chen Pippi for a while, and then he went to the South City. Tonight, at the entrance of the famous star-picking casino in the South City, a nervous master and servant were whispering. The black-haired lad with a clear face and shallow cheeks looked up at the gold-painted signboard of the star-picking casino, and swallowed a mouthful of saliva, not knowing whether it was due to nervousness or greed, and asked in a slightly hoarse voice, "Sang Sang, do you think we will be chased by the casino if we win too much later?" The slightly dark-skinned little handmaiden was also very nervous. She held a heavy box in her right hand and shrank her body behind the lad. Listening to the noise coming from the dim light, she said in a trembling voice, "Young master, I am more worried about whether your idea will work or not. Can you see the points on the dice by sensing the chi of heaven and earth? Are you sure? If I lose all the money later, don't be so anxious that you'll bet on me." "What nonsense are you talking about? Besides, even if I bet you, the casino may not accept it." Ning Kei nervously rubbed his hands and said, "As for the confidence, didn't I show it to you many times last night? I never fight a battle that I am not sure of. I will definitely win, but the key is how to run after winning. I'm sure we can win." Sang Sang didn't seem to worry about running at all. After hearing that they could win, she gently bit her lips and made up her mind. She took out a small star made of folded paper from her old belt and said softly, "I took 200 taels of silver from under the bed and exchanged them for a banknote. There are still more than 100 taels of silver in the box. Young master, take it and win as much as you can." Well, this chapter has 4,000 taels of silver, including the 2,000 taels of silver from yesterday's chapter. But if there are still 2,000 taels of silver left, I'm not sure I will make up for it. I'm really writing like an idiot. Last night, I counted the days with my leader and found that there were still 5 days left. At that time, I wanted to open the window and jump down. But to be honest, I was able to finish it. Before writing this chapter, my body was weak, and my hands were shaking. I told Zhang Xiaohua that I couldn't do it anymore. Chapter 123. The star-picking casino in Southern City was the most profitable business of Master Meng, a tycoon in Jianghu. After the bloody battle in Spring Breeze Pavilion, Master Meng's power directly collapsed and the casino was smashed into a pile of ruins. It was not until 2 months later that the casino was renovated and opened again, but now no one knew who was the boss behind the casino. Although it was a casino that rose from the ruins, it was, after all, a time-honored one in Chang'an City. Besides, it was decorated at a high price. The wooden tables in the casino were bright, the lanterns were hanging high, and the furnishings were exquisite. There was no sign of decay. Ning Kei and Sang Sang walked along the way, looking at the gauze curtain around them and hearing the deliberately suppressed exclamations in the hall in the distance. They could not help feeling a little strange. When they were in the frontier fortress, they often went to the casinos in City of Wei and Kaiping Market. However, compared with those small gambling shops full of sweaty, stinky, and swearing voices, this place was like another world. No matter how luxurious and elegant the decoration was, a casino was still a casino. After all, it was a bloody place where people put their lives on the chips to fight. People from all walks of life shuttled through it. Although Ning Kei and Sang Sang, the young master and servant, were a little conspicuous, the stewards and servants of the casino were used to seeing gamblers of all kinds, so they just glanced at them casually and did not pay special attention to them. As for the gamblers in the spacious hall of the star-picking casino, none of them noticed their arrival. Dressed in silk or linen clothes, men and women of all ages, regardless of social class, were sitting or standing around dozens of big tables covered with brown blankets. They were nervously staring at the dice cups or the black triangle chips on the tables. It was extremely hot in midsummer. On the 3 sides of the hall, there were 7 or 8 female servants waving the long fans in their hands to blow the wind into the hall. However, because there were too many gamblers in the hall, the air was still a little stuffy. Mixed with the smell of expensive powder and tobacco and wine, a faint and exciting smell of ambition gradually came out. If it were not for the extravagant ice basin placed under each table in the casino, the smell would probably be stronger. The casino was not a charity. The purpose of investing was to make money. The more extravagant the investment was, the more money they wanted to make. Ning Ke looked at the details in the hall and looked at the dealers in the same cyan uniforms, becoming more and more nervous. He did not know the lower limit of betting here and did not know whether they had brought enough money. He went to the counter to exchange chips and asked about the minimum bet and the rules of the game. Feeling a little relieved, he took Sang to look around the hall of the casino. When he saw someone leaving the table where the dice cup was, he squeezed in before the others without hesitation and looked directly at the table, ignoring the disgusted looks from the people behind him. Shaking the dice cup to see who was the biggest was probably the simplest and quickest way to determine the winner in the casino. What Ning Ke liked were the two characteristics of simplicity and quickness, whether it was killing people or gambling. In addition, he knew that this was the only way he could cheat, so he naturally stood there like a nail and refused to leave. The 3 dice were divided by 9 points, and the more dice were big and the less dice were small. If the dealer got 3 sixes, it would be the best. However, if the gamblers were brave or bored, they could naturally bet on the leopard. If they won, they would not only kill the gamblers at the table, but also compensate the gamblers on behalf of the banker of the casino. However, this kind of thing rarely happened in the casino. Staring at the big dice cup on the brown blanket, which was at least twice the size of an ordinary one, and the pretty female dealer waved her bare white forearm and rolled the big dice cup up and down like a magic trick, Ning Ke listened to the crisp and dense sound of the 3 dice in the dice cup, and the sound of the dice cup falling heavily on the table. Ning Ke slightly lowered his eyes and seemed to be hesitating. In fact, he had already begun to meditate. The psyche power in his brain passed through the ocean of qi and mountain of snow in his body, slowly and gently perceiving the breath of heaven and earth around him, and then perceiving everything around him through the breath of heaven and earth. This kind of perception was very wonderful. The invisible psyche power wave mobilized the breath of heaven and earth to spread out and fall on things, which would slightly deform the perception. This kind of perception was fed back to his psyche power wave through the breath of heaven and earth, and then entered his mind, forming a picture that was not clear, but he could see some details that were invisible to the naked eye. There was a fat hand on the brown table. It was the hand of the owner of a cloth shop. After the dice cup was set, he threw 50 silver taels worth of chips to Big and pressed the rest of the chips under his palm. 50 silver taels worth of chips was not a small amount, but the owner's expression did not change. Only the hand that was pressing the chips was slightly trembling. Ning Ke did not care about the gambler's psychological state. Although he often earned some money by gambling in the city of Wei, he knew that even the best gamblers could not win forever. Today, he came to the star-picking casino just to win a lot of money with those wonderful abilities, so he only needed to care about whether he could see things that others could not see. There is only the smallest chip of 2 taels of silver left, and he still behaves so calmly. Through the subtle feedback of the breath of heaven and earth, he saw the number of chips under the boss's trembling palm, and could not help laughing and muttering in his heart. The word "see" was not an accurate description. He could only vaguely feel the edges of the chips and the protrusions on them. There was no warm and smooth sensation to the touch, and there was no visual effect of seeing it with his own eyes in his mind. If a cultivator could cause such an effect by mobilizing the breath of heaven and earth, it could be imagined that there must be many cultivators in history who had nosebleeds every day, felt tired every night, and died of qi deviation because they peeped at the scenery of women's breasts every day, or fantasized about something soft and tender. The beautiful female dealer looked around gently, and opened the dice cup with both hands. The 3 dices at the bottom of the cup were 2, 3, 3, small. The cloth shop owner's palm on the table stiffened slightly. His 5 fingers grasped down, tightly holding the last chip. He forced a smile to the people around him, nodded, and walked out. At this moment, Sangsang's small body finally succeeded in squeezing in. She squeezed to Ning Kei's side with difficulty, stood on her tiptoes, and looked at the pile of chips and the dice cup on the table with her willowy eyes, forcibly suppressing her nervousness. A slight and clear sound of the dices hitting each other rang out again, and a new round of gambling began on the table. The big dice cup rolled up and down in the fair hands of the beautiful female dealer, and then fell on the table. "Please make your bets." The female dealer looked at the gamblers around the table with a smile, and reread the rules of star-picking casino as she did at the beginning of every new round of gambling. "If you don't make your bets within the time limit, please wait for the next round." The big and small gambling table was in the shape of a semicircle. On the wide table, several betting areas were drawn with a thin white cloth. In addition to piles of chips and a few teacups, there was a small and cute hourglass placed in the middle of the gambling table. After every round, there would be someone to turn the hourglass upside down. Ning Kei glanced at the fine sand flowing quickly in the hourglass, and found that time was a little tight, so he quickly focused his attention on the big, black and heavy dice cup. Because he looked so attentively, the expression on the lad's face was particularly focused and nervous. Some guests at the table couldn't help laughing, and joked, "I don't know which family's kid came here to play star picking. Does he think he can break the dice cup if he stared at it for a long time?" Ning Kei didn't pay attention to the jokes around him, because he was very nervous at this time. Besides, could he tell these gamblers that he was going to break the big, black and bright dice cup? Just as he said to Sangsang at the entrance of the casino, Ning Kei never fought a battle without preparation in his life. In order to win money today, he had spent the whole night yesterday experimenting. He felt how deep the water in the bucket was through the wooden bucket, how many taels of silver under the bed through the bedboard, and whether Sangsang squatted under the window with her eyes open or closed. After repeated training, he was sure that he could control the weak qi of heaven and earth. Although it was impossible to shake Mount Tai, it should not be a big problem to see Mount Tai. Therefore, he came to the star-picking casino with confidence. As for the whole night of meditation, his speed and proficiency in mobilizing the qi of heaven and earth had been greatly improved, which was a benefit beyond his expectation. According to the battle plan made by the master and servant in Lin 47th Street and the poor practical experience, Ning Kei thought that the subtle qi of heaven and earth controlled by his psyche power could easily pass through the thick wall of the dice cup when he looked at the black dice cup, and then feel the wonderful depression on the surface of the dice. However, he never expected that the qi of heaven and earth he controlled couldn't go any further after entering the thick wall of the dice cup. Ning Kei's body suddenly stiffened, and he looked at the big black dice cup in shock, not understanding what had happened. At this time, the bottom of the cute hourglass in the center of the gambling table was almost full of sand. An impatient gambler at the table saw his appearance and began to urge him. He looked at the black dice cup in distress, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. According to his usual behavior, he should give up this game. However, he didn't know whether it was because of the hourglass and the urging, or the strong unwillingness in his heart. He didn't want to give up. He stared at the dice cup, frowned, and desperately increased the strength of his psyche power to control the qi of heaven and earth to stab into the dice cup, which was like an iron wall. Break! The qi of heaven and earth, compressed to the extreme by the psyche power, seemed to become a sharp invisible needle, and finally stabbed into the dice cup. Feeling the wonderful touch like a hot knife cutting into butter and fingers into cream, and seeing the 3 dice lying quietly at the bottom of the dice cup, Ning Kei suddenly relaxed, and his tightly knitted eyebrows gradually relaxed. Just before the hourglass finished, he took out the small star that was folded into a silver note, and gently put it on the side of the table that bet on big. Chapter 125. A thin and tall man in a thin cyan robe was enjoying the wind on the highest stone wall of the West Gate Tower. Because he was too thin, his cyan robe seemed to be hung on a bamboo pole, fluttering in the night wind. The summer nights in Chang'an were hot and sultry. Rich families had their own maidservants to hold fans and fill their rooms with ice, while ordinary people had to open their doors and sleep on bamboo beds in the streets. Everyone knew that the higher one went, the colder the night wind would be. However, the Tang Imperial Palace and the majestic city wall were not easy to climb. But the thin man in cyan robe could, because his name was Qi, the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang in Chang'an. Everyone in Jianghu knew that Qi was ruthless. But it had to be said that he was the most useless one among the brothers at the top of the Fish Dragon Gang. Now that Spring Breeze Pavilion old Chow had left Chang'an and Chang3 and the others had returned to the imperial court to work, he naturally took over as the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang. Now, with a casual order from him, 3,000 cyan-robed men swore to die for him. In addition, everyone now knew that the Fish Dragon Gang was a fish thrown into Jianghu by His Majesty. Even the government dared not neglect them. Undoubtedly, Mr. Qi was the only leader of the Chang'an underworld, so it was not a big deal for him to enjoy the scenery from the city tower. However, facing the night wind, Qi, who was holding a pot of wine, did not feel proud at all. Instead, he looked gloomy. He took a sip of wine and sighed. He had successfully transformed from an ordinary underworld leader to a leader of the cultured underworld. He missed Cao Xiaoshu and his other brothers very much. However, Cao Xiaoshu had gone on a long journey, and Chang San and Chen Lu had official identities, so they could not meet at any time. Thinking of the good times of drinking and eating in the past, Mr. Qi, who was already famous in Chang'an, wished he could immediately return to the days when he was a follower. At this moment, a man came from afar on the city wall. He greeted the gate guards and hurriedly ran over. He lowered his head and said a few words in Qi-V's ear in shame. With a puff, Mr. Qi spat out a mouthful of wine. The wine turned into a fine mist and fell outside the bottomless city wall. He did not know if it would startle the rock eagles nesting on the city wall. He stared and asked, could it be wrong? There's no mistaking it. I've already sent someone to Ingo to inquire. That brat went there first and won more than 10,000 taels of silver. Mr. Qi still didn't believe it. He touched the back of his head and said hesitantly, cultivators go to the gambling house to make money? How could there be such a shameless person? Why does it sound so strange? That subordinate said with a bitter face. No one believed it, not even the head shopkeeper at Ingo's side. But in the end, didn't he still obediently hand over the silver, and then hurriedly sent a message to us? Mr. Qi believed that his subordinates did not dare to deceive him, so he confirmed that a cultivator was shamelessly making money in his gambling house. Thinking of his elder brother's order before he left, he couldn't help but change his face. He threw the small flagon in his hand into the darkness outside the city wall and said fiercely, make him spit out the money, or let our brothers chop him. Damn it, he is not a sublime being in the see-through realm. Do you think that I can't chop you to death just because you know some tricks? Although he said so, he could not do it. The Fish Dragon Gang had always been particular and tough. If Mr. Qi was really driven into a corner, he could really ask his 3,000 brothers in cyan robes to chop that cultivator to death. But the problem was that cultivators must have their own sections. He had to take a look at the background of that bastard cultivator before making a decision. The city wall of Chang'an was extremely high. It was not easy to climb up, and it was also very difficult to run down. When Mr. Qi ran back to the gambling house from the city gate, he was already exhausted and out of breath. And during this period of time, that bastard cultivator had won more money. Hearing the news, Mr. Qi's face became more and more unfriendly, and his mood became worse. But when he saw the person who pushed the door and entered, his mood and expression became extremely weird. He wanted to laugh but also wanted to cry, but he couldn't cry. He thought to himself, what the hell is going on? Hearing the 3 words, Mr. Qi, Ning Ke pushed the door and entered. As expected, he saw the man in cyan robes who looked like a bamboo pole. Ning Ke's expression instantly became very interesting. He thought to himself, although we are familiar with each other, in fact, we are not that familiar. Well, for the sake of Cao Xiaoshu, I will give you a 50% discount on all the previous accounts. His reaction was so fast that he actually made 3 turns in one sentence. He thought to himself that if he acted too familiar with this man, he would be too embarrassed to take the money he won. But if he pretended to be completely unfamiliar with this man, he was afraid that the man would really turn against him. He knew very well that the Fish Dragon gang was not to be trifled with, so he finally used the name of Cao Xiaoshu. Mr. Qi was stunned by his words, and he was so angry that he almost laughed out loud. He glared at Ning Ke and said angrily, "Are you sure you want the money you won from the gambling house?" Ning Ke thought to himself, although we are familiar with each other, we have only met each other twice, so we are not that familiar. Do you have the nerve to refuse the money? You can't be too conspicuous. In my opinion, you'd better explain to the instructor of the academy. It's more important to get some practical benefits. Ning Ke thought of the legendary 2nd floor of the academy that would open next year and General Xiaoho who was at the distant frontier for the empire at this time. After a moment of silence, he smiled and replied, "Because I know I'm too ordinary, I don't have to say it out and cause trouble. It's okay to say it out when I can go further on this road in the future. You're not a member of the Fish Dragon gang. You can do whatever you want. But since I rarely meet you today, I'd better finish the formalities as soon as possible." Mr. Qi stretched out his slender fingers and pointed at the land deed in front of him. He said, "There's a transfer agreement that needs your signature. From now on, this casino will be transferred to you. I don't have to waste my energy to manage it on your behalf anymore." Ning Ke thought that this couldn't work. A casino needed manpower, money, and background. He was going to study in the academy, so he couldn't let little Sang Sang wear a dealer's uniform to manage a dozen gambling tables. He rolled his eyes slightly and said with a smile, "My good brother, please continue to manage it. I really don't have the ability or the time." After a dispute, Mr. Qi finally failed to resist Ning Ke's continuous flattery and shameless spirit. He had no choice but to agree to Ning Ke's conditions. The casino was still Ning Ke's, but it would be entrusted to the Fish Dragon gang. Ning Ke didn't need to do anything but get the monthly dividends according to the proportion agreed by both parties. After the negotiation, Ning Ke left the newly opened casino in the West City with Sang Sang immediately without having supper or calling over girls. He left in such a hurry as if he was fleeing for his life. Even when he returned home on Lin 47th Street, he remembered that he didn't even remember the name of the casino. Sang Sang took out the thick stack of banknotes from her belt and put them into the box. She looked around the shabby bedroom. Her willow-like eyes kept wandering from beam to beam and mouse hole to think of the safest place to put it. In the end, she lifted the bed board according to the old way and carefully hid the box in it. Looking back, she saw Ning Ke sitting on the armchair in a daze. The expression on his face was very complicated and wonderful, as if he was dumbfounded by the cornucopia in the sky, or as if he was hit so hard that he wanted to cry. "Young master, you are a little strange today. Sang Sang looked at him and asked curiously, "Just now, when you left the casino, you looked as if you owed someone 800 taels of silver. You were so embarrassed." "How could I not be embarrassed? I've been so embarrassed today. I've never done such a stupid thing in my life." Ning Ke answered angrily. "I am worried that the instructors of the academy will be angry if they know. At the same time, I have decided to withdraw all my masterpieces from the front shops from tomorrow onwards. As for the business, I will buy some cheap scrolls from poor scholars from the fragrance workshop to sell, and earn some difference." Sang Sang threaded the needle and thread through the insole and pulled it hard. She opened her mouth to bite the thread and tore it. Then she asked with puzzled eyes, "Not even one scroll to be sold? Young master, doesn't this seem a little like the poor suddenly getting rich?" Ning Ke was stunned by her words. He coughed twice and said, "The adjectives you used are not very good. This is not called the poor suddenly getting rich, it should be called being content with a little bit of wealth. Of course, it is not good for the poor suddenly getting rich, and it is not good to be content with a little bit of wealth. Then I will hang a few of my works in the front shop, but the price will be raised, and I will not sell them for less than 1,000 taels of gold." Sang Sang thought to herself, "Young master, your most expensive painting was only sold for 20 taels of silver, and even the most expensive one was sold. That day, you specially ordered me to cook a pot of braised pork to celebrate that I finally made a fool of a rich man. Now you say that your scrolls will not be sold for less than 1,000 taels of gold. Although there are indeed many stupid and rich people in Chang'an, how can there be so many fools?" Looking at the strong puzzled look in the little girl's black eyes, Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and explained with a smile, "Remember, we are too rich now, and we are not short of that little bit of wealth. This is like buying a horse's bones with 1,000 taels of gold, and it can increase our reputation." According to his instructions, the next day, Sang Sang removed most of his scrolls from the old brush pen shop, and then went to the fragrance workshop to buy a lot of new works of calligraphers. When there were customers who liked Ning Ke's scrolls and inquired about them, she would honestly tell them that the owner's handwriting was extremely precious, so it could not be changed by 1,000 taels of gold. The development of the situation was different from what Ning Ke had expected. Marking his calligraphy at 1,000 taels of gold did not make the reputation of the old brush pen shop soar. Instead, the shop's business became worse and worse. Other than receiving a lot of cynicism such as, "Is the boss of this shop crazy because of poverty?" there was no other gain. However, now that the master and the servant had suddenly become too damn rich from the poor, it was really like the poor suddenly getting rich. Although he could sense the breath of heaven and earth and even won a lot of money, it was a pity that these books were still as difficult to understand as the wordless heavenly book. He could only remember the strokes, but still could not store any word in his mind. He took a thick copy of the Dictionary of 10,000 Arts Appreciation and sat down on the floor under the west window. He looked at the blazing sunlight outside through the window crack and began to read it without much interest. Time passed by. When he reached the 17th page of the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong, the blazing sunlight quietly disappeared through the window crack. The old library was shrouded in darkness, but he did not get up to leave. The beautiful female professor by the east window had finished today's hairpin-style small regular script. She packed up her writing brush, ink, paper and inkstone, gently rubbed her wrist and stood up. Seeing Ning Ke leaning against the wall and staring at the thick dictionary in a daze, she could not help but smile gently. She did not remind Ning Ke that it was already late and just quietly walked out of the old library. As the night deepened, the talisman inscriptions on the bookshelf glowed with a faint luster. Ning Ke was not frightened, but stared at the talisman inscriptions seriously. He watched as the luster disappeared in a flash, and the talisman inscriptions returned to their original white and crude appearance. Then, he watched as the bookshelf slid away from the wall without a sound, and a fat lad came out, panting. This was the second time Ning Kai and Chen Pipi met each other after countless messages. When they first met that night, Ning Kai was on the verge of death and unconscious. When he woke up in the morning, he was too tired and did not take a good look at Chen Pipi's appearance. However, he did not want to miss this opportunity today and stared at Chen Pipi with his bright eyes for a long time. "I say, you are really fat." Ning Kai looked at Chen Pipi and exclaimed, "I really don't know what you've eaten in the past 16 years. How could you be so fat? But fortunately, you're round and firm enough, so you don't look wretched or disgusting. But there is one thing I really don't understand. Are you really the only talented lad in the academy entrance examination of the academy in 100 years to get 6 A+ grades? You also got A+ grades in driving? Where can the military ministry find a military horse that can carry you and run so fast?" Chen Pipi's big round face was full of shame and anger after hearing such a long paragraph of words. His soybean-like eyes flashed with anger and he said angrily, "Driving, driving. I chose driving." Ning Kai suddenly understood and sincerely praised, "That's a very wise choice." Chen Pipi covered his forehead and did not bother to pay attention to him. He directly asked, "What do you want to see me for?" Ning Kai smiled gently and said, "Let's talk about those trivial things later. I brought you some food." As he spoke, he took out a few big white steamed buns and some pickled vegetables from the paper bag. He warmly said, "Let's talk while eating. The small pickled vegetables in the academy's kitchen are good. I don't know if you have any on the mountain. The steamed buns are a little cold. I don't know if you can get used to it and if you can eat your fill." Chen Pipi looked at the food on the ground and refused to sit down. He said incredulously, "I know you have a favor to ask of me, but I really didn't expect you to only bring a few cold steamed buns and pickled vegetables. How is this the attitude of asking for help? I say, you should at least bring a few bowls of crab porridge. The crab porridge in the kitchen has to be paid for separately. It is not included in the accommodation fee. Why waste it?" Ning Kai laughed and continued to ask him to sit down. "And let's not use such ugly words as asking for help. It should be considered as learning from each other." "Learning from each other?" Chen Pipi scornfully looked at him and said, "Do you think you are qualified to learn from each other?" Ning Kai continued to beckon him to sit down. He seriously replied, "I have just started my journey. But who knows who will go further on this road in the future? If you treat me better now, I will return the favor in the future. You won't be at a disadvantage. Besides, I can teach you math, right?" Chen Pipi was really confused by his words. He proudly snorted and sat beside him. He reached out to pick up a cold steamed bun and a handful of pickled vegetables, putting them into his mouth and eating. "Why do you always act at night? Isn't it better to meet during the day?" Ning Kai asked. Chen Pipi answered vaguely while chewing the steamed bun, "Senior sister Yu has been practicing regular script here during the day. How dare I come here? You have to understand that the academy's rules forbid us from helping students outside the building. I risked being beaten by senior brother to leave a message for you. Why don't you express your gratitude? Aren't I treating you to a steamed bun?" Ning Kai replied with a smile, "I know the academy's rules are strict. Those instructors often use their old fists to beat people. Why do I feel that you are more afraid of second brother?" Chen Pipi glanced at him. He knew that this guy was curious about the situation in the back of the mountain of the academy. He sneered and said, "Compared with second brother's fists, the academy's rules are too gentle." They were both 16 or 17 years old and had a huge appetite. The two of them devoured the steamed bun and pickled vegetables like a whirlwind. Chen Pipi then stole the female professor's kettle by the east window and drank 2 mouthfuls to moisten his throat. Then he rubbed his belly and looked at Ning Kai, pretending to be indifferent. I can already sense the existence of specific objects through the breath of nature, but I can't move them. I'm not greedy, I'm just curious. You can sense specific objects? Chen Pipi stared at him with his small round eyes. Yes. Ning Kai counted with his fingers and gave an example. On the first night, I sensed the candlelight, then the pillow, the paper, the bed, the silver, the leaves in the yard, and a bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup. Chen Pipi's eyes widened even more. He thought to himself that to sense specific objects, one needed to be in harmony with the qi of heaven and earth, and also needed to communicate with the qi of heaven and earth. Only in this way could one sense the outside world through the qi of heaven and earth. This was something that could only be done in the state of perception. How could you do it? This chapter has been edited. I'm starving. I'll continue after eating a bowl of instant noodles. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. But he could understand the see-through state in 3 months, and the most terrifying thing was that he entered the see-through state and knowing destiny state in 1 day. This kind of creation was really incredible, and there might not be another person like him in the whole cultivation world. After a long time, second brother looked at Chen Pipi and said calmly, "Eldest brother is gentle and kind, and a real gentleman. He accumulated a lot of experience, and once he was enlightened, he soared to the sky. His accumulation is so deep that you and I can't reach it." Chen Pipi nodded repeatedly. He was in awe of second brother, who was strict and solemn, but both of them were extremely proud and congenial, so he knew some stories about second brother. Tonight was the first time that he knew that eldest brother, who was gentle and generous to his subordinates and respectful to his teacher, wore an old robe, held an old book, and tied a water ladle, and looked more like a servant of the academy, turned out to be such an extraordinary person. He could not help but nervously start to reflect on himself. In the 2 years before eldest brother traveled with his teacher, did he ever show off in front of eldest brother shamelessly? This chapter has 4,000 words, so it is more than 10 minutes late. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.